Hi, welcome to In the Can with Carmella Cann. Today's topic is the U.S. Supreme Court's recent rulings. We have two guests today. Our first guest is James Balletto. He is a writer, producer of the film Flatbush Luck, and he's also a registered Republican. Our second guest is Chris Alberti, and he's a software engineer, and he is a Democrat. So, gentlemen, welcome. Chris, congratulations on being married, by the way, before we start, and having a kid.
Thank you.
You have a beautiful new son, so I just wanted to congratulate you.
Yes.
So we're going to start. We're going to discuss the Supreme Court and some recent rulings. So first I want to discuss something that's been recently in the press, which is Biden's student loans. The Supreme Court knocked down Biden's loans, and recently Biden's been trying to figure out another way kind of to pull them through his administration. We're going to start with James. James, do you agree or disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling on the student loan relief of $400 billion that would affect millions of people?
Oh, I definitely agree with the Supreme Court. He was already adjudicated that he exceeded his authority, and now he's sort of circumventing the Supreme Court by trying to do a end around their decision. It's just not fair to all those millions of people who paid their loans in the past, who worked hard, who worked their way through college. He euphemistically calls this forgiveness. He's not forgiving anything. What he's doing is he's transferring this debt onto the American people. I heard figures as high as $500 billion over the next 10 years. It's unfair and it's outrageous.
So, Chris, I mean, what are your thoughts on the student loan relief that the Supreme Court knocked down?
Yeah, so I read about this a little bit. So I think the Supreme Court itself probably made a call that it was able to make. Like it seems like, the president didn't necessarily have the authority to make this, do the forgiveness. But in principle, and morally, let's say, I think the forgiveness was due, like it's necessary. Basically, I think
so. You're in support of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the U.S. has to invest in more education, and we can't tell people you have to go to college, and in order to work in roles that are necessary for the country, like teachers and social workers, and then load them with student debt at a rate that they weren't expecting, and making less money than they were expecting, not being able to pay them.
I mean, what about people who took out arts degrees that took out $100,000 in loans and probably chose professions that are not even going to match that kind of, what are your thoughts there? I mean, do you think taxpayers, this should be, being passed on to the taxpayers to bail them out of their loan?
Well, I mean, two things. One thing is that most people, I think, have a debt that's around, on average, I think the debt is about maybe $39,000. Okay. So it's much less than the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're saying. And it's true that arts degrees are not as important as being a social worker or a teacher, but they're still, the artistic production of the U.S. is one of the greatest strengths of the country, right? So to stifle it, because you don't want to support education in these fields is against the benefit of the country. So I would say that, I mean, there's an argument to be made that all these things have to be supported. Maybe the form of student debt forgiveness, the way Biden did it was not the best way, but something of this sort needs to be done, because these people are fulfilling essential needs, and they're suffering. And presumably they're taking money out of the assets of their families, and preventing their family members from going to college. Maybe some of their family members are dying because they have to give up insurance because they have to give the money to the person who has to pay their debts.
So,
So, I mean, these people need help. So,
yeah, I mean, Republicans have claimed that Biden was trying to use this to buy votes. So, James, what are your thoughts on that argument that this was being used to buy Democratic votes?
Oh, absolutely. He's doing this to to curry favor with young people. Let's remember also, where does this end? Do people suffer, let's say they have mortgages that are stifling. Does the government step in and pay for the mortgage? Credit card debt, does the government come in and pay that? I mean, where does this end? I mean, people have to be responsible. You're creating a moral hazard, and I think people will be less mindful of the majors that they're taking. If the government's going to pay for it, well, you know what, I'll study art history or something that's not going to provide me with a job when I graduate. So I think people need to be responsible, and every time government steps in and does something like that, I think what you're doing is you're creating a moral hazard, and people are going to be less prudent in the things that they study, the majors that they get their degrees on. It just doesn't work, and I think hopefully the voters will see this and will not vote for Biden because of this scam that he's trying to pull.
I mean, Chris, what do you say about the fact that Republicans say that this was a way for Biden to buy votes?
I mean, education needs to be addressed, and
so you find that education is a valuable thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, is this a way to address the root cause? Because
it's not the perfect way, but it's a good way.
I mean, I believe the court ruled that, Congress, that Biden couldn't do this with an executive order, which is kind of what he tried doing. And I know Nancy Pelosi had mentioned that he couldn't do it with the executive order, and then he went ahead and did it through an executive order.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
So, and, I do think both parties should kind of agree if this is something to push through. I mean, I'm someone who has student loans, and I've been paying them, and I'm someone who paid for my education, so I am not necessarily for this personally as someone that's taken responsibility for it. But I do understand, that people do get into a lot of debt. Especially while getting my master's degree, there's not a lot of availability for aid. So, and there's the argument that people with higher educational degrees have statistics shows that they make higher salaries than those that don't. And is it fair that we're bailing them out and there are people who didn't go to college and are probably making a more average salary? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Chris? I mean, is that fair that taxpayers should be bailing them out? And
I mean, I again, sorry, maybe I'm simplifying the matter too much, but education is important, and we need higher and higher education in the country as time goes on. It's a competitive advantage in the world. Like, other countries have higher education rates than the U.S., and investment has to be made in these things. And not every educated job has a high salary, especially teachers and social workers, I would say. So,
I know, I agree with you. I think that everyone should have access to education, and money and economics should not deter you from having access. Maybe the solution to this problem is that, city and state universities should be for free. Maybe that's a way to get to that. But, there are private institutions that can cost up to $250,000 for an undergrad degree. And sometimes people don't take into consideration these things and get into, huge debts without really, thinking about it.
Can I say something? You said they should be free, community college, state colleges. There's no such thing as free. I mean, the taxpayers will have to pay for it. Professors are not going to teach for free. You have to maintain these buildings, the dorms, the classrooms, what have you. Let the free market handle this situation. If people don't, people go into these fields of study knowing what the salary levels are. If there aren't enough teachers graduating from college, guess what? Their salaries will go up because there are fewer of them. There's a supply and demand dynamic involved. The government is not the answer. Let people be people. I'm not saying that education isn't important. It is important, but for many years, okay, people have worked their way through college like I did in a supermarket for many years. I went to a city university. My education was fine. It paid off well. And because I had to pay for it, I made sure that I studied a field that when I do graduate, I have a degree that was marketable.
So my next question here that I'm going to move to is affirmative action. So the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action for race and conscious admissions and was a blow to Harvard University and the University of North Carolina. So what are your thoughts on this ruling, Chris, that the Supreme Court made on affirmative action?
Again, I guess it's kind of a similar answer to what I said before. So, technically what they did is probably correct. Actually, I was reading California already struck down affirmative action in 1998 for public colleges. And so kind of equalizing all the country on the same standard as California seems fine. But on the wider point, that the Supreme Court would make a ruling against racial equity, let's say, is unfortunate, in my opinion.
So you're for racial equity?
Yes.
Okay.
I think...
So you're for affirmative action?
I am for affirmative action. And I think what will happen in practice is that, as happened in California in public institutions, universities will have to find different ways of equalizing the racial population in the universities. I mean, this is something that I'm not an expert on, but to finish, there is still a huge gap in wealth between different races. And
so you think race should be considered then in the application status?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe not. Yes. Yes.
And James, what are your thoughts on that?
I happen to agree with economist Thomas Sowell, who points out that affirmative action is actually hurting the minority communities, especially in the areas of education. By admitting students who otherwise would not qualify for certain elite colleges, yes, they meet their quota and they have this window dressing. However, many of them, a great number of them, don't graduate. So it's to their detriment. Whereas if they would have gone to a state university, they would thrive, they would get their degrees, and they would get a good high-paying job. It engenders a lot of racial animosity. For instance, a lot of students try to apply for Harvard. Those who don't get in, maybe thousands of students don't get in. They might feel, oh, I didn't get into Harvard because of the affirmative action, and they become resentful of minorities.
I mean, do you believe that systemic racism exists in this country?
Racism will always exist. Do I think
Systemic,
it's systemic?
like...
No, it depends on what you mean by that. That's an evaluant term, a very inexact term. I don't think so. I think America is fair. I think if you work hard, most people are decent, and you will drive. I don't see this white privilege that people like to talk about.
I mean, there is statistics that show that, there are more white people that are benefiting in certain situations than people of color. It's kind of difficult because I'm of two minds of this, and I'm conflicted. There's a part of me that agrees with the court, and there's a part of me also that believes that systemic racism does exist in our country. And affirmative action is definitely a way to address. It's interesting that you say that because Dr. Phil recently was on the Chris Cuomo show, and something Dr. Phil said I found a little bit interesting. He said that professors that are teaching that the goal of the country should be equality of outcomes. Dr. Phil said that this country has been built on talent, hard work, added value, and rewards. Now people want to have equality of outcomes without considering for quality of input. When people want to be rewarded the same way without putting the same input.
Let me be very specific here. In our colleges right now, we see professors that are teaching that the goal should be equality of outcome in this country. The fact that I've entitled this new network Merit Street Media is not by accident. This country was founded on and built on a meritocracy where talent, hard work, added value is rewarded. But now the idea is, no, let's not do that. We need to all work towards equality of outcome without consideration for quality of input. That has never worked. It's not going to work, and we need to get back to recognizing that when people work hard, they should be rewarded. When they don't, they shouldn't. You can't have somebody sitting home in a beanbag eating Cheetos all day and they get the same outcome as somebody that's out really working hard and making every effort they can to contribute to society. They don't get the same outcome. They shouldn't get the same outcome.
What are your thoughts on, because affirmative action is kind of a way to meet equity on some level. And Dr. Phil does not believe that that model is sustainable, without being political, that model is just not sustainable, that you can't have the same outcomes if you're not putting the same input. I mean, James,
I agree with Dr. Phil at all. Absolutely. I mean, if somebody works hard, gets an education, saves, yes, there is going to be inequality, and there should be. Obviously, those people who work hard should be rewarded for that. Those who do not, if you lack education, if you do drugs, if you don't save, if you engage in profligate spending, you should have less affluence. I mean, I don't believe that everybody has to end up at the finish line at the same time. Now, we should do what we can to increase opportunities, especially for minorities, but affirmative action has hurt the African American community, especially, and the Latino community. Here's something, do you know, in certain areas, in certain localities and municipalities where they have affirmative action, companies will not go there for their businesses because they don't want to have the risk. Well, if I hire minorities in this community, guess what? If they turn out to be inadequate for the job, if I fire them, I'm going to get sued. So what do these companies do? Well, we'll go to a white area and we'll hire white people. So this way, if they're incompetent, we just get rid of them and we don't have to worry about affirmative action and getting sued.
I mean, there is data that shows that diversity, equity, and inclusion actually helps the bottom line to various companies. So that model, a lot of organizations wouldn't be using this if this didn't affect the bottom line. I mean, Chris, what are your thoughts on what Dr. Phil said versus the equity of outcomes?
Yeah, so I would classify education more on the equity of opportunity as opposed to equity of outcomes. You give people an education, once they have the education, they go into the workforce, and that's where they show whether they were hard workers or not, right? I would say that education is kind of the right lever to pull to give people the same starting point. And
I mean, the whole idea of systemic racism, a lot of universities have gotten rid of the SAT scores. They view them as there has bias in them towards race. Some of these standardized tests, and there's scientific data that shows that, when these tests have been evaluated, that they do have racial components as to access. I mean, James, what are your thoughts on, do you think that SAT should exist, standardized testing, or that there is?
Yes, I think it should exist. How about fairness? If a Asian student works hard, gets good grades, is it fair that he has to be kept out of an elite college so that we make room for somebody just because of their skin color? I mean, we have to treat people like individuals, not as members of groups. Okay, there's something called fairness. Let's judge people by their character, not by the color of their skin. Okay, let's go by merit. Let's use standardized testing. Let's just be fair and let the best students go into the elite colleges that they're best suited for. Okay?
Chris, I'll give you 30 seconds to respond to this statement, and then we'll move on.
Yes, the issue is that people who are more wealthy can send their kids to better schools that will give them a better SAT score. So they have better access because of economics. Or they can pay for better schools, pay for college prep, pay for even like counselors that will guide them through the application process correctly. and that costs money. And if some races have the white people have 6 times the wealth of black families in medium, I think, which means that they can prepare their kids much better for college. So.
So you think that they have more opportunities to access because of economics?
Yeah. So the starting point is much
I do
higher.
want to move on here. One of the biggest cases that came out of the Supreme Court was Roe versus Wade. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because I just did an episode about whether abortion will be on the ballot in 2024. But I got a lot of comments on YouTube that said that the topic I covered was not fair and there wasn't balance on there. So, I mean, James, what are your thoughts? Is abortion on the ballot in 2024?
It might be. What I will say is I consider myself in many ways a Goldwater, Rockefeller, Nixon type of Republican. I believe that individuals should be free to do that which they want to do so long as you're not harming other people. If a woman wants to have an abortion for any reason, I think she should be free to do so. As a conservative, I believe in limited government. Why should government tell people what to do with their bodies? Why should government tell you who you can sleep with and who you can marry? These are not classical conservative positions. As somebody who's considered to be right of center, more conservative, as a conservative, I support a woman's right to choose.
Okay. Chris, your response to James?
Yeah, this is funny. I grew up in Italy, and in Italy the limit for abortion is 12 weeks. And I've never heard anybody complain about this when I mean, maybe I just wasn't listening to the right people, but 12 weeks to me in Italy seemed like a fine, it's kind of like a compromise, right? Like the US had it had viability, right, which is basically 24, 28 weeks. And now it has like 0 in many cases. So I'm not, again, I don't want to really take a strong position on this because it doesn't really concern me.
I mean, do you believe that there should be like a certain amount of weeks that a woman has,
12,
or it should be unlimited?
12 to 14.
So 12 to 14 for you feels comfortable.
I think it works for many countries.
Okay. So you're like a moderate Democrat in this point of view.
And there should be exceptions for many, many things.
Okay, so there should, for rape, for instance, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Or a woman's life is in danger.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just make it clear? I'm not saying that there shouldn't be limits. I'm actually more lenient than my Democratic friend here. I would say 16 weeks would be more reasonable. And if a woman wants to have it before then, for any reason, she should be free to do so.
Okay. And the last topic I just want to cover is the Supreme Court recently came that Trump can stay on the ballot in Colorado. And also they are reviewing his immunity case right now. So, James, what are your thoughts on both of those rulings? One coming up and the one that was just made.
Well, again, let me just say that as a Rockefeller Nixon Republican, I have my issues with Donald Trump, but I don't think it's fair for certain states, certain political parties to deny people in certain states, like the Colorado case, oh, you can't vote for him for whatever reason. I think you're weaponizing the legal system. I don't like that. As far as immunity is concerned, I think nobody is above the law, even the President of the United States. I don't think he has done anything that warrants an indictment. I think he'll be cleared of whatever charges here. I don't see any evidence that he did anything that's wrong criminally.
You're talking about the immunity?
I'm talking about the immunity. I don't see any. I think he should be held. If they can prove that he did something, that's fine. I don't think they can, but if they do, then he should be held.
I mean, do you think he has presidential immunity or not?
No, he does not.
He does not.
He does not.
Okay.
If he did something wrong that was illegal, he should pay the consequences. All I'm saying is I don't see him doing anything wrong, but I don't like the idea that states like New York are weaponizing this and going after him for political reasons. That I think is wrong.
Okay. And Chris, what are your thoughts on the Colorado ruling and the one coming up about presidential immunity?
I feel like we mostly agree.
So you agree with James's?
He should be on the ballot.
That he should be on the ballot
Yeah,
in 2024.
I'm pretty sure most people would agree with that. And
Yeah.
I almost think that the Colorado ruling was like a message that they sent, and it was obviously going to be struck down, and it wasn't really even a question.
I mean, do you feel that Democrats are trying to use that as a tool to kind of keep him off the ballot because they really, it's being used as a political tool? James, what is your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's, they want to keep him off the ballot. I actually think it's ironic because I think he's the weakest candidate that we can field. I personally was supporting Chris Christie and then Nikki Haley, but listen, give the people the opportunity. If they want to vote for somebody, they should. You know, when he was elected in 2016, there was a lot of people who were urging him to go after Hillary Clinton and throw her in jail. If you remember, lock her up, that whole nonsense. To his credit, he did not do that. He didn't weaponize the DOJ, and he didn't go after her. I think this personal attack on him to try to, especially here in New York, to go after him for things that is not criminal, I think is wrong.
I mean, I don't want to get into the New York stuff because that really has nothing to do with the Supreme Court, and
True.
you know, and I agree with both of you. I think that, you know, keeping someone off the ballot, I agree with the court, was not, you know, if parties start using that as a weapon because they don't like the other side, it's not going to work. And let the voters decide.
Yes.
I mean, let the people of this country decide who they want for president. You know, I'm going to just bring up one last thing. We can make it very short. So the Supreme Court made a decision that it was freedom of speech versus discrimination. And with an LGBTQ, where someone can actually deny to make a website for people who are married because it conflicts with their religious values and it fell under freedom of speech.
The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling along ideological lines to exempt some businesses from civil rights laws, siding with Colorado evangelical Christian web designer Lori Smith, who refused to work on same-sex weddings.
I cherish the freedom to express unique and custom messages that celebrate causes that I'm passionate about.
Despite her state's anti-discrimination law requiring businesses open to the general public to serve all equally, the court held the First Amendment right to free speech prohibits Colorado from forcing a website designer to create expressive designs speaking messages with which the designer disagrees. But the court's liberal justices warned the ramifications could stretch much further. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, raising concerns this decision threatens to allow the exclusion of other groups from many services. It's prompting fear from LGBTQ+ community leaders about whether this has opened the door to encourage discrimination.
Their attack on civil rights laws puts everybody who's at risk for discrimination at greater risk.
President Joe Biden expressing his deep disappointment, saying in a statement, "In America, no person should face discrimination simply because of who they are or who they love. When one group's dignity and equality are threatened, the promise of our democracy is threatened." And the nation's first openly gay cabinet member, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, writing on Twitter, "Today's ruling will move America backward."
You know, Chris, you're married. And you're LGBTQ. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with the court or not?
So you're talking about the cake?
Yes, and not the cake. I'm talking about the website designer.
Yeah, so I don't know the case actually, but I guess I know that the Supreme Court declined to really clarify.
So they
the
said that due to freedom of speech, that and her beliefs, that she did not have to design websites for gay people. I think that from what I recall is if it were like everybody else, it was fine, like if it were a regular website, but if it were more in detailed where, you know, her First Amendment right to speech and her beliefs played a role and they actually sided with her. I mean, do you think that's discrimination? If someone who's been married, do you think that if you wanted a website, someone turning you away because of their religious beliefs is discrimination?
I mean, I can see how there's a gray area between the right to practicing your own religion and the right to, you know, not being discriminated for being gay. I don't think, in general, you can rule entirely in one direction or the other. Hopefully they don't. Hopefully they don't say, religion always win, but hopefully they don't say the other way either. I think it kind of has. I would say it has to be arbitrated in a case by case.
Okay. And
But-
James, your thoughts on this?
I think it violates the public accommodation law that we have. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think people should have the right to discriminate. What if they said, well, we don't want to do this website for you because you're African American? I don't think people would tolerate that.
I know. What if that was part of the religious thing? I mean, you know.
Well, you have the right to engage in your religious beliefs. However, like any right, there are limits. You don't have the right to discriminate and use religion as the basis for that. It's a shame that here in the year 2024 that we're still denying people services and discriminating against people because of the sexual orientation. It's a shame. I wish the court would just would force people to obey the law and to serve everybody equally.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being in today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to today's topic. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and leave me a comment and let me know what you thought. Also, let me know what topics you would like me to cover.